everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Library Access, a Keyforge podcast. I'm Nick, and I'm here with Alex and Steven again. I have a couple quick side announcements for the Keyforge.com before we begin. The forum is now up and running, but it's awfully quiet. You can get to it at thekeyforge.com/forums, or you can go to thekeyforge.com and just click the forum link. Please go there and chat it up. You know, it takes one person to get all the rest of them there, so do your part. We posted a new article yesterday. It is from a new series. It's called Mobius Scroll, and it covers the Four Horsemen. It's a pretty good read if you're curious kind of what's behind the hype of the Horsemen and if it's all justified. We also have a new podcast produced by thekeyforge.com. It's called Archon Report. You can find it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thekeyforge, or on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. And it's basically just a really short burst of news. The goal is not necessarily to make it a weekly show, but to have one that comes out when there's relevant news. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and check it out. Last but not least, our Patreon is live, and we've already got a handful of patrons. So thank you guys so much for contributing. It's super nice to see kind of a way to measure the interest, and it definitely gives us incentive to keep pushing as hard as we're pushing, especially in the new year. If you'd like to show your support, you can throw money at our faces at patreon.com/thekeyforge. We also hosted an event on Tuesday of this week in our Discord group. You can actually get to that Discord by going to keyforgediscord.com. You can also go to thekeyforge.com and click Discord, but that one's way more handy. We ran a sealed tournament. We randomly generated decks and assigned it to everybody. We had about 30 people show up, and it went super well. So congratulations to Matt, who came in first place and won a custom-built wooden deck box. We'll host another event on Tuesday. We're not sure if it'll be Archon format or sealed. That's kind of to be determined. It's free entry no matter what. You can play on Crucible. And we'll be offering a pretty cool yet-to-be-announced prize. Make sure to join our Discord if you haven't already. Like I said, you can get to it real fast by going to keyforgediscord.com. So I have a question. Yesterday, I was sorting through all my Keyforge stuff, and I noticed that I have too many decks. And I've kind of come up with a system to deal with my addiction to buying decks. But I was curious, what do you guys do with too many decks? How do you handle owning more than a playable amount of decks?
Buy more decks. I mean, look, like the game is great. I want to show my support. I'll throw money at our faces on Patreon. I'll throw money back at Fantasy Flight's face. No, the actual answer is I have them all like separate out into a box, and I have them specifically like put in a kind of order. But for the most part, I will usually play 1 or 2 decks a night, either on Crucible or I'll do them at local game stores. But for the most part, I try my best to rotate them around. It doesn't always seem to work. There's definitely a couple of favorite decks that I have they're always the go-to. Like if I'm starting to get salty, I'll be like, all right, nah, take it out, put the new deck down, play one of my good decks, kind of like refresh myself.
Right.
Because I definitely have some bad decks.
How many decks do you have?
I am at 36 right now.
Okay, so you have more than me. So I guess my question's even like more valid for you, or my dilemma is even more valid for you. Do you track your wins and losses with them?
Not on the official. I just got the app updated today, so I'm going to start to like a fresh, clean start with all my decks. It's not exactly the best because some of my decks I've played a lot with. And some of the decks I've played a couple of nights. So the ones I've played more with will obviously probably have a higher win rate. But yeah, I'm going to be starting doing that. But so far, the only one that I've really kept is the two or three decks that I use as often as I do, like for tournaments. Those I keep track of. But for the most part, the rest of the decks are fun decks. I'll throw them a couple friends when they want to play. I make sure to have a good variety so I can be like, well, here's like a quick rundown of what all the houses are. What would you like? And I don't have one of every single combination, but I'm getting close.
Okay. I do. I don't use the app because when I had started, the app was kind of glitchy and I couldn't like log into it reliably. So I made a spreadsheet, which is actually proven to be super handy. I put the name of it, the the different houses in it, and I have a like a games played column, a win loss, and then I have one set up for like deck scores and stuff that I haven't plugged in yet. But it's proven pretty handy to be able to actually look at the amount of games I played with it and the win loss ratio. I also have like a win percentage, but it's proven to be super tricky, and it's almost like sucked some of the fun out of it for me when I'm like strictly playing to build up the spreadsheet, because my goal right now is to figure out 20 decks I don't like. I have 29 decks, so I want to figure out which decks I don't like, and I want to get rid of them. I want to give them away or sell them or whatever, and then I want to have 10 that I can really like learn the heck out of and figure out which ones are good, so when competitive play comes around I'll know which one to actually bring. But it's surprisingly difficult, and it doesn't help that Keyforge takes so long to play. It might on Crucible, it might take me 45 minutes or so to get through one game, and that's just with one deck out of 29. And to like get any sort of reliable answer out of that spreadsheet as to what's good and bad, I have to play them like 4 or 5 times each. And I won't sit down and do the math on it because it'll blow my mind, but that's going to take a long time to do. So that's kind of how I'm handling having so many decks, and I'm trying to work through them. But it's easier said than done. But it is fun to be able to play like almost a form of sealed. I have my good deck. I have like just one that I think is really good. And if I go play in person and somebody there's just opening up a deck of their own, I'll pull one out that I've only played on Crucible and sleeve it up. And if I don't look at the notes I have on my spreadsheet, I have no idea what's in it. Like I'm still going into it pretty blind. So that's been fun to still like discovering my stuff. But what about you, Alex?
I'm way behind on you guys on deck acquisition. I'm at 10 right now, and that already feels like way too many for me. In that, if I'm playing on the Crucible, or I was playing with a friend the other day, just out at a local tavern, I didn't know what to pick. Like I literally just sort of looked at them and just went, this one. And there's actually a little bit of fun involved in that for me, just in terms of really adding to the randomness that I think is such an appealing part of Keyforge. But I do see a point in the near future where I'm probably going to have to cull some decks out and either give them to friends to play with or keep them in reserve for if I ever get to play in that bring your worst format or anything else like that, because there is so much to be gained from playing your more this word again, we used it so many times last week, competitive decks over and over and over to really learn them. I have the very first deck that I ever opened up recently just suddenly turn into a beast because I finally figured out how to play it properly, and now my win ratio with it's off the charts for me anyway. And I'm not very good at Keyforge, so if I get 75% win rate, I feel like I'm champion of the world. But it's hard to feel like I'm spending time well just like randomly choosing decks when I can see the results of having spent a little bit of time learning one or two decks. And so I almost wonder, maybe having a smaller number might be more beneficial to my enjoyment of the game in the long run, leaving aside, wacky formats and choose a deck at random or let your opponent choose one of your decks from, a deck list you present him or some other format of that ilk.
Variety is the spice of life, my friend. You gotta get one of every kind. You gotta get one of every single house combination. You gotta play with everything. Like just playing one or two, that's gonna get boring. Like that's the fun for me in Keyforge is that there's so much variety, and the fact that I can't change my deck out means I'm having to learn these new things and having a different experience with every deck. I don't know. I don't see the problem of having too many decks. I see the problem of not having one of every deck. Like if I could have like 40,000 decks, I'd be happy. My wallet will not be, but I'll be happy.
Meet the man who spent $500,000 on Keyforge.
You mentioned like keeping a bad deck around for the for the formats where that's applicable. You bring a bad deck and your opponent's forced to play it. Uh, are there any other benefits to owning or keeping around bad decks, or is the possibility of that potentially unofficial format? Is it worth keeping those bad decks in your box for those cases, or is it better to try to pawn them off on somebody, or what would you do with a bad deck? I guess.
I feel like playing my worst decks. For one thing, the game is still young enough and I'm still inexperienced enough at the game that it took me a while to really suss out, whether a deck was good or bad. And it's not always losing every time that makes it bad, since I have some decks that I think are on paper, if I could pilot them better, would probably be, a more winning deck. But there's certainly something you learn about the game from playing bad decks, and it can teach you lessons that, I could say to you, uh, a lesson about Keyforge, or give you sort of a good general strategy. But sometimes really understanding the value of denial, or the value of forcing your opponent to choose between reaping or dealing with the board state, or forcing your opponent into a certain direction. Sometimes playing with a bad deck and being the one on the receiving end of a beating is really the lesson that you can learn from having a bad deck and playing with it a little bit. Also, I'd put it out there that when I was teaching a friend to play recently, having a bad deck so that he didn't just get stomped every single time that he was trying to learn the game was actually kind of useful, because I feel like he might have gotten a little bit frustrated, feeling like he was taking the one deck that he had and running it up against the decks that I know how to pilot and have relatively decent time playing with. So being able to deploy a bad deck for him to really work against, that was useful. It helped make the game a little bit more fun, sort of like the handicap that we envision with chains, but a little bit more natural.
That's a good point, because I've considered keeping a bad deck around, as like an option for give your friend a deck, get him started in Keyforge, but maybe not giving them the deck, but you using that bad deck and letting them pilot your good deck, and just kind of almost guaranteeing them a win. That's a decent strategy to get somebody interested, not put them off immediately, and it gives you a reason to keep that deck around. Also, for I don't know, what you said is certainly not wrong. There's something to be said about playing a bad deck and like learning its intricacies and trying it out as best as possible. But what I've learned so far, and I can't wait to get like a lot of data so I can like really boil it down and squeeze it all out and like see what I can get from it. But I have some decks that are just bad, that I don't think it's a piloting issue. I have some decks that like lose an overwhelming amount and have a couple wins to them, and then I have decks that have just never won once, and I can tell from my first hand that they're every single time that it's not a great combination of cards. There's just no synergy, no cards playing with each other. So I think there's different stages of bad decks. There's great decks, there's okay decks, there's bad decks, and then there's like broken, impossible decks that are maybe more suited for arts and crafts projects, or or maybe a format where you bring your worst deck, if that's a thing that takes off. But that was an interesting point about you keeping a bad deck around for you to play and letting somebody else play your good deck and letting them kind of stomp you in favor of teaching them the game and capturing their interest.
I'm telling you right now, I'm into this idea of bring two decks, your best deck and your worst deck, and your opponent has to play you, with your worst deck against his worst deck. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, reversal seems like a good format.
If you do something like that, then you're really relying on them to be honest with their worst deck. Or do you do play? I mean, explain that scenario that you just mentioned.
All right. You basically, I'm not good at theorizing formats. People are much better than I am, but I like the idea of I bring a bad deck and you bring a bad deck, and then we have to play each other with each other's bad decks. So it suddenly becomes a contest of who had the worst deck that was so hard to pilot and so crappy and had so little synergy that even a good player couldn't, make it work. And there's then create some value and hopefully some fun gameplay elements out of that.
Okay, yeah, that was my mistake. I thought you were suggesting that each person bring their worst deck and then they play those decks, like they pilot their own decks. But then you'd be relying on them to actually have brought their worst deck. But I see what you're saying.
If I only own one deck and it's a double horseman deck, it's my worst deck, guys. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Well, in Alex's scenario, you're about to play against your double horseman deck, so good luck.
Never mind. No, I've got an awful deck though. Like, I mean, this thing is the logos in it is good. The Sanctum, the Untamed is awful. And if anyone wants to look at this deck, it's Trias A Skitterex, the 3.14159th. And I'll toss you the name of that so you can put it in the description if someone else wants to see this horrible thing. It's got all the good logos cards, though. It's got a Wild Wormhole, 2 Libraries of Babel, a Skippy Time Hog, and then go down to the Sanctum, and there's Epic Quest with 1 Knight, and Doorstep to Heaven, which is a card I've never been able to get off correctly. It's always just been gain an amber, lose an amber for me. And then the Untamed is a couple cooperative huntings, a troop call with 1 single Niffle-Ape, and I think there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 creatures in the entire deck. I'm looking at it right now, and it's just I opened it up on stream when I was streaming the one night I was opening up my booster box, and everyone in there was just looking at me, and they're like, "What is this absolute garbage that I just pulled?" And I think it's one of those decks where if you bring it to a reversal deck, you're basically being a terrible person because you're like, here's this unpilotable jank that the algorithm spit out for me, and I'm able to keep it around because I'm sure I will get some use out of it where I sit down and play some games in that same way where all right, let's just bring out our worst decks and let's see how we can pilot. But I look at this deck and I'm pawing through it right now, and Virtuous Work and Wild Wormhole are the only 2 cards that I'm like, these cards will work 100% of the time in this deck. Everything else is, oh yeah, I can draw a card. The rest of my deck's bad. I don't want to draw it. It makes me sad.
We had kind of an extensive conversation about this last week, what makes a deck good, what makes a deck bad. And one thing that I kind of wish I was listening back to the podcast that I wish I had brought up was a deck that has so few creatures that you have a real chance of getting nothing on the board on your first 2 or 3 turns. And I have one deck like that, and it is brutal to pilot. I don't think creatures are the be-all, end-all, but I do think that there's something to having, a handful of situational cards that you can't do a thing with. And there are decks out there that certainly fall into that algorithmic trap, sadly.
Epic Quest seems to be the trap card I've found for a lot of decks. They're like, yeah, Epic Quest, this card's real good. It gets me a free key. Oh, I've got 1 or 2 knights to synergize with it. Oh, I have to hold an entire hand full of Sanctum cards just to get a benefit out of it. No, I'm good. I've seen some decks that have, tons of knights, and Epic Quest will fire every time. And then, like I said, with my deck here, Epic Quest will fire never. I don't know. There's definitely some trap cards that look real good on paper that just basically, unless you get the cards from the algorithm, that card is just a complete dead draw every time.
Right. I have a topic that kind of loosely ties into this. Not quite. I was curious if you guys have encountered any either banned decks or oddities. And I guess oddities as in decks that are just don't work together, but more so in imperfections and things like that. There's the decks with the goofy names, or I think one popped up. I've only seen one of that had a giant pink X across every single card, it was printed on it, but it had been packaged and sent off and all that. So I don't know if you guys had encountered anything cool. I personally had opened I think I have 2 decks that are like that I'm not sure there's an official term for it, and I think I'll use the wrong one. It's not a miscut. It's a misprint, where the print was shifted on the sheet. So there's the cards don't bleed over from one to another, but there's a good several centimeter gap on each side of a bunch of the cards that are white and don't have any ink on them, and everything's shifted way over. The left border is almost non-existent. And I think that's cool. I also have kind of an interesting oddity. I pulled a Horseman deck a couple weeks ago, and I've been playing on Crucible, and it's actually pretty consistently good. So I sleeved it up on yesterday, actually last night, and I noticed that the identity card is I didn't inspect it too much. It's either really frayed, if you took your fingernail and kind of scratched along the top, if you were playing cards without sleeves on them, that, or it's a printing error at the top. I didn't go finger it and see what it felt like, but that was kind of interesting. I thought like, oh man, what are the chances that like my good horseman deck is kind of, you know, screwed up, and like I feel like, you know, hurts its resale value if I would choose to resell it, because someone will think, oh man, you know, you stuck that thing in your pocket, when in reality, like, no, I pulled it right out of the plastic, and it didn't have a chance to get messed up. But I have that, and then I've noticed on a couple cards there'll be interesting spots of like just like a lack of ink, tiny little, you know, ballpoint pen size dots, maybe two or three ballpoint pen size, um, in areas on cards that, you know, look like they were worn off, but they didn't have time to get worn. Which those don't bother me. Not even from a resale value. You know, if I were buying a deck, like Keyforge is interesting in that like nobody's collecting a single card. You know, that it's not like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh where there's just these crazy cards that are super rare that you just can't get your hands on. And if you get them, you know, if you get your Black Lotus, you put it in 6 different sleeves and in a box and a safe and all that. So there's not really a like a collectible aspect to Keyforge for the sake of. I mean, that might not be true. It's really too hard to tell. As it is right now, there's no super collectible card. It might be possible that certain decks, if kept in pristine condition, are, you know, become way more valuable later down the road, as prints stop being made for certain cards or houses or whatever. But as it is right now, I don't know. It just doesn't really bother me, even if I were buying a deck. If there were some like printed imperfections, you know, I obviously don't want somebody who spilled water on a deck or scratched it or whatever. But if he said, you know, look, man, I opened it up, and you know, if he said I opened it up and the identity card was bent, I almost wouldn't care, because like that was out of your hands. Like it's not gonna disrupt the game. That's just me. Have you guys encountered any banned decks or oddities or anything like that?
No. Nope. That I maybe in my local scene there might be some, but they haven't either shown them to me or brought them out. Most of them I see that are on the Facebook group or just in by passing.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the not local to me players, but they travel a lot. Um, in their local Facebook group, they're talking about another one of those Red X decks that as like it looks like it's like the first print that they like tested and like something's wrong with it, so they like try to X them out and push them through.
Interesting. I wonder if I wonder if a deck with that X on it has like a duplicate.
Might also be.
If it had, you know, if it has like a brother sister deck with the exact same name and like it actually made it to print, I'd like to get my hand on that. That kind of, I don't really care about banned deck names. Like I don't think they're going to be super valuable. Even if, you know, I think they'll have value, especially because that algorithm is not going to spit those bad names out anymore. But like at best, you're looking at like your $10 deck is worth $20. It's like having a, you know, to compare it to something silly like Pokemon. If you have that first generation Machamp that came with one of the starter decks, it came in like a unique. It came in a like a wrapper, I guess. I was watching this video on YouTube where these people, he said, you know, these people come to the store and they expect a bunch of money for these cards. He was like, if you have this card, if you have this Machamp, everyone has it. Don't bring it. You know, it was worth $2 when it came out. It's worth $3 now. So I think that's how, you know, those bad name decks will be. You know, you bought that deck for $10. It might be worth 20 in the future, maybe 30 if you're lucky. Like certainly not worth hanging on to for 2 years to sell. But I think the decks with like the giant X's on them, or like really crazy miscuts or misprints or something like that, if they exist, I don't know to what extent they do. You know, the one I have is like the most extreme misalignment I've seen. But I think decks like that might fetch some money in the future, especially if and as Keyforge continues to grow.
Yeah, I could definitely see that because I mean I know even a couple people who are buying, they are buying decks and breaking apart the decks because they want one of every card. They just want it for a collection. They want to put it in a binder and call it a day.
So I went to my store like last week. They've been out of stock for like a week and a half, where before they were getting like every Monday, every Friday, like reliably. And I went in there one day and I was just itching to buy something. So I was like, you know what? I have 30 decks. And that's kind of what spawned this spreadsheet. I want to figure out which of my decks are garbage, and I want to rip them apart and I want to put them in a binder. And I don't care what I do with it at that point. I don't care if I build a deck with it or if I just look at it as a collection or if I use it to like study cards and figure out combos. I have it sitting right next to me right now. I bought like the perfect number of sleeves. It's ready to roll. But I also have an interest in doing that just because I think it'd be cool. You know, it is a collection, and then it kind of puts it into perspective. I have 30 decks, and I think I'm missing a chunk of cards, like a good chunk.
I'm missing a good chunk.
Yeah, so it's kind of there is a collectible aspect. Like I learned today about a card I didn't know existed. It's a discard, and there's 3 of them, like Master of 1, Master of 2, Master of 3.
Oh yeah, they're real neat.
And I might be wrong about this, but I think it has a play effect, and it's destroy any creature with that
with the number. Yep.
power.
Yep.
Okay.
It's actually, I have a Master of 3. It was in the first deck I ever opened. I have never been able to use it effectively in any way, shape, or form, but it's Reap, destroy any creature with a power of 3 exactly. So it doesn't work on 1s, doesn't work on 2s, 3s only.
Is that a rare card?
It's supposedly the rarest card.
Oh, okay. So is it rarer than 1 or 2? Master of 1 and Master of 2?
Sort of. From what I understand, and this was from a article I read, so don't 100% quote me on this. It's that same thing with how the horseman, when you get a horseman, you're guaranteed the other 3. When it spawns one of the master of spots in the algorithm, it then gives you a 1 in 3 chance of getting 1, 2, or 3. That's why I believe 3 is the rare, and then 2 and 1 are the specials out of the rarities. I'd have to actually look and double check my like I said, don't 100% quote me on that, but I'm 95% positive that is how they said that's how they figured out why they were special.
Okay, that raises an interesting question. Do rare cards? I've seen this posted in the Facebook group, which is kind of what spawned it. Do rare cards actually matter? Do rares impact victory? Are they worth additional money, or is it just kind of an interesting thing to look at, but it holds no real value? And I ask because I see in the buy sell group a lot. People say 7 rares in this deck, but it's that's as far as from what I've seen, a rare is not necessarily an indication of a good card. Some of the best cards I see are littered among decks, and they're more common than not. Whereas the cards that pop up on my list as being exceptional for one reason or another, rare, they don't seem to really impact play as much as I would think, which kind of goes right along with what you just said about having that Master of 3, and I've never been able to actually trigger it. And just it's not a matter of play testing it. You can see just by what it is. It's a discard that destroys any creature with a power level of 3. You can just think about it. Think about your games you play. That's not a common occurrence. It might be nice to have once in a while if you're lucky, but it's not a. If this were to compare it to something stupid that people are going to get mad about, if this were a constructed game and you called that a rare card, it might not occur. It might not pop up in packs frequently, but that rare title is not going to make it sought after at all. It's a pretty mundane, uninteresting, unuseful card, I feel like. Do you guys agree with that?
I would 100% agree with you
as well.
I guess from one perspective, I feel, and Steven and I sort of had a little conversation about this before we started recording. So many of the rares are just very situational cards. They're interesting cards from a gameplay perspective, and I love seeing them pop up, especially in the people I'm playing against decks, because they create weird situations. And for me, Keyforge is all about weird stuff happening. I love it when a game is unpredictable and it's got huge swings or play effects that cause oddball things to happen. Things like Evasion Sigil, I love that because it makes everything uncertain, which I think is really one of the things that makes Keyforge a super fun game to play and helps level the playing field for all players. But so often, I think we still approach it from that mindset of rare means good, and therefore, a card or a deck with 7 rare cards must be a great deck. Whereas, we've talked about this. A horseman deck is not in and of itself, just by having the horseman, despite that being a relatively rare thing to pull, a great deck. I do okay with my horseman deck, but it's because the Mars in it is really strong. The horsemen themselves don't tend to play a factor when I win with that deck.
You got a Mars horseman deck? You looking to sell it? Because I'll take it.
I don't know, man. I kind of like playing with it. But I also have another deck that has the Sting in it. Are you guys familiar with the Sting?
Remind us.
Okay, so it's a rare Shadows card. Skip your Forge a Key step. You get all the ambers spent by your opponent when forging keys. Action, sacrifice the Sting. That thing is so situational and so dangerous, but it is so fun to have out on the board because it creates such a feeling of uncertainty amongst people who've never played against it. And that's one of the things that I genuinely love. So I don't know that I would necessarily say that rare cards make your decks better or stronger. I'm sure there's a bunch of rare cards that probably do, but I would definitely say that a lot of the rare cards that I have in my decks make the game more fun to play, and I think that's super valuable.
It's funny you bring this thing up because I actually think it's one of the better of the rares. Because it's solid. Like the fact if you can get it out like early before they forge their first key and get it down for 2 keys, I think it's one of the more solid of the rares. But I 100% agree that the rares in this game are more powerful effects, but also more situational effects. Like I look at Kefki Dragon, and that thing is crazy, absolutely bonkers. But it's such a win more card that I never want to see it in one of my decks. Like it is specifically only good when you are already winning the game or already being able to generate the amber that you need. And I feel all of the rares have that kind of either they are win more, they don't progressively push the board state further when you're behind, like they don't really bring you back into the fold, or they're just really cool effects, which is fine. And I think they each add something to their faction and to the game. Like Neutron Shark and Skippy Time Hog are absolutely fantastic. The shark will kill itself repeatedly, though.
What about you, Nick?
I mean, I kind of agree with exactly what you guys said. That's been my experience at least. That's kind of why I brought up on the buy sell group. I don't go to bat every time I see it pop up when people are boasting that their deck has 7 rares, so that's what's justifying this price or that price. But I've kind of learned that like the rare title is meaningless for the most part. And I'll be the first to admit I haven't sat down and studied the card list. Like I said, I'm still discovering cards. So it's possible that we've just seen like the least rare of the rare. And there are some rares out there that are, exceptionally good and kind of directly compete with what we're saying. But for the most part, my words of advice to somebody, trying to figure out decks and how to buy used or how to value their own decks or whatever, don't focus on, the common, uncommon, rare at all. That's not an indication of whether a deck will be good or bad. And honestly, from what we've talked about, I wouldn't actually, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but those, the more rares in the deck, it might be kind of a downside to it. Like you said, they're situational cards largely, and the last thing you want is a deck full of really specific individual situational cards that you can't just plop out for your turn to turn, that you're not having to like prepare a bunch for. So yeah, I think we're all pretty much in agreement there. I had a question. Do you guys have any favorite combos? We were kind of touching on that, but is there anything that stands out that, and they don't have to, I don't know, I guess you can answer this in one of 2 ways. If you have these giant grand, once in a blue moon combos that just totally win you the game, that's cool. But I've got, like I have a little scratch pad here that I just write down notes when I'm playing. This is like on here it says, Zookeeper is a cool card. And I don't know what that was supposed to mean, but it was telling future Nick to go look at that and see what he can do with it. But I also write down any interesting combos that are not super exciting, not worth writing a blog post about or anything, but are handy to keep your eyes peeled for in a deck. Do you have any of those that come to mind?
I've got one deck that I specifically went out and bought online. It's the only deck that I've bought online that I've not opened by myself because I really wanted to play this combo. And it is with Zookeeper and the Knowledge is Power rare from Logos. And the entire idea of the combo is that the Zookeeper, when you reap with him, he allows you just to take an opponent's creature, verbatim, pick it up, and put it directly in your archives. That's it. Nothing fancy, nothing special. And then the Knowledge is Power.
He is a monster. I hate that frigging guy. Unless I have him, in which case I love him.
Especially in Mars, where you have like John Smith, and you're just like, I'll just do that again. It is quite literally the Mr. Krabs meme of playing that song again. People hate it. But now just power is for, you can either archive a card, which is cool, not a big deal, or for every single card you have in your archives, gain an amber. And it's a really fun combo. The deck wins about 40% of the time. I took it to a tournament. It was Survival Archon. Or not Survival, sorry, I apologize. It was Adaptive Archon. So it was the one where I have to like give someone else my deck and we just straight off decks. And it won about 40% of the time of that tournament. I won 0 times with it during the day. It just got crushed every time. But boy, the times I get that combo off and I'm getting, 6 or 7 amber off of their creatures, like it's just such a good feeling. I'm just like, yeah, I'll take this. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm sure they're just scowling at you from across the table while it's happening as well.
Oh, 100%. And they always ask me before they go, like, hey, you want to access your archives? Because if you access the archives and any card of the opponent's is in archives, it immediately goes back to the opponent's hand. So like, you want to access the archives? I'm like, no, I'm good. No, that ain't me.
One of the simplest ones that I love dearly and deeply, and practically every Brobnar deck seems to have access to this one, is just plop down a Brobnar with a play effect and then hit War Drummer and plop him down again. So if you're throwing down, I think it's Smash, the guy with 2 or 3 A's in his name who stuns an opponent creature when he comes on the board, plop him down, stun a creature, pop down War Drummer, stun another creature. Or, I forget which guy it is that allows you to it's not the Gangner Chieftain. He's the ready and fight with a creature, but you can combo with him and War Drummer for some great effects. Especially if you've got something out on the board like War Chest that allows you to really gain amber for having fought or killed other creatures. Just plopping that War Drummer down and then using it multiple times, especially if you've got more than one play effect Brobnar creature in your hand, it can be so deeply satisfying. It can be a big swing turn too. Similarly, being able to use Compod, which I think I've mentioned in a previous episode, the rare Mars artifact that allows you to reveal cards from your hand, Mars cards from your hand, and then ready Mars creatures. Using that with John Smith basically allows you to create crazy turns where, you can put guys into play immediately ready to go, and then, over and over and over use them while reaping with John Smith, especially if you have more than one John Smith in a deck. It's ridiculous. It's super fun, and it allows you to have sort of these epic turns where you get a ton accomplished without even having to have that many cards. And that's a cool feeling too. I like those combos a lot.
Mm-hmm. I have two written down on my list here, and they're not terribly interesting. They're not worth getting a deck that has, but they kind of made it to my list because I unintentionally play them almost like every game that I play these decks. One of them is Full Moon and Nature's Call. So Full Moon is it's an action play for the remainder of the turn, gain 1 amber each time you play a creature. So you can, play creatures, have some on the board, whatever. And then you play Nature's Call. It's an action. They're both untamed. Play, return up to 3 creatures to their owner's hands. So typically you'd play Nature's Call and, pop your opponent's cards back up into their hands. But play that on your own creatures, pull them back into your hand, play them again, gain some more amber. You can say you have say in this hypothetical turn, you have, 5 untamed cards in your hand. You have Full Moon, you have Nature's Call, and then you have 3 creatures. You play Full Moon, those 3 creatures, you gain 3 amber, pull them back in your hand with Nature's Call, play them again. You end that turn with 6 amber, 7 amber because Nature's Call gives you 1. I think that's a pretty interesting one, and kind of that's what's cool about Keyforge is I'm personally discovering little things like that where you've got that action play, return up to 3 creatures to their owner's hand, and you'd expect that would be a card to play kind of against to harm your opponent, but that could help you. And I'm sure there's other cases with untamed cards or whatever others, I guess, to prepare for a future turn where pulling your own cards back in your hand could be beneficial. Another one I have, probably less interesting than that one, is Bad Penny and Pawn Sacrifice. So Pawn Sacrifice is a Shadows action that gives you an amber when you play it, and it's sacrifice a friendly creature. If you do, deal 3 damage to 2 creatures. So you have Bad Penny, which has destroyed, return Bad Penny to your hand. You use Pawn Sacrifice to pull Bad Penny back into your hand, you use. Let me redo that. My phone started ringing. Sorry. So you've got your Bad Penny out on the field. You use Pawn Sacrifice. Bad Penny goes back to your hand, and then you play it again. So you've done 3 damage to creatures potentially. You can remove 2 of your opponent's creatures, and then you still end. Your board state is the same, if not improved upon, because you played Bad Penny this turn. I keep discovering small interactions like that you might not notice at first glance, but have kind of significantly changed the way I look at a deck, or just all decks in a whole. And I wonder how many more of these I'll discover. And I'm excited to learn more of the cards and be able to spot these things from afar and really be able to, pilot decks on another level.
Bad Penny is like a Swiss Army knife for a Shadows deck. Like, I've found so many uses for Bad Penny, especially the combo that you mentioned. That one's fantastic, especially if you have a deck that has more than 1 Pawn Sacrifice in it, or if you've also got, a deck where, you've got cards that, things like Lost in the Woods and stuff like that, where sometimes you have to get rid of your own creatures. I guess Lost in the Woods would have her shuffled back in the deck, but there's certainly scenarios in which you want to play a card your opponent doesn't have a creature that it would be applicable to on the board, and Bad Penny can be your sacrifice, and it doesn't matter because she just heads right back to your hand, which is awesome. Especially too if you can get like something like Speed Sigil out on the board, where you can put out something like Bad Penny, they get to go and reap for you right away, hit a Pawn Sacrifice, get an Amber, or whatever else out of it. Man, I just love that card. She's great. I think every Shadows deck should have a Bad Penny or 2.
Man, if we're gonna be talking about perfect world decks, what I would love to see is a combo, and this is because combos that interact with different factions are like what is my bread and butter. Like, I love when the factions can interact with each other. Autocannon. It's an artifact, comes into play, deal 1 damage to every creature immediately as it enters in play. Like, okay, it's a damage. It's nothing too great, nothing too wild. And then save the pack from Untamed, where it does destroy each damaged creature, gain a chain. Like, it's something really simple. I think Autocannon is a rare, if I remember correctly, and Save the Pack is a common. And I have to have Brobnar and Untamed in the deck. But, oh man, like, just having that instant kill button at the ready at all times, where, like, Save the Pact is a little situational. I mean, it's pretty easy to damage every creature on the board. But the fact that you can just do it automatically, like, real fun.
I was curious what you guys think. Are all houses created equal?
I think the answer is no. I think that Untamed and Shadows win more often than other houses in decks that are well balanced in those factions. That's personal observation. I don't have any data to back that up. So please, folks, comment if you have a differing opinion on that. I think that some houses, and of course, this is always going to be dependent on the deck. There are killer Brobnar focused decks out there. There are killer Sanctum focused decks out there. But I do genuinely feel like when I oftentimes get totally stomped, totally skunked, don't even get a single key forged while the other person has marched to victory, often it's because they have a strong Shadows deck, and those are the hardest ones to have a response to. Or, an Amber Rush deck based around Untamed. I've run into so many of them in the wild, just playing against people on the Crucible, playing against people in at local stores. They just, I don't know if it's necessarily that they're stronger, but maybe it's just that the pieces to make them a more winning house inside of a well-balanced deck are more common, or the algorithm, makes them come up in people's decks more frequently. I think with the current state of things, I would put money on Untamed and Shadows being the strongest houses from a winning perspective. And of course, once we start to have real win-loss tracking, theoretically, at some point with the app, these are things that we're going to be able to test, hopefully, really start to see what the percentage of winning houses and decks are. But that's purely supposition on my part at this point, but I feel like it's supposition supported by personal experience in the, couple hundred games I've played of Keyforge at this point.
Alex, I like you. You're a good friend. You're wrong. Wholeheartedly super wrong.
All right. I want to hear this.
I think that every single faction, or I keep calling them factions, they're houses. I gotta call it the right terms. but I think every single house in this game is built equally amongst themselves. And what I mean that is that every house has something that they really specialize in, that they're really good at, a couple things that they're okay at, and a couple things they're real bad at. And because of that, I think that you're seeing more combos with your saying that like Shadows is winning all the time. I definitely think Shadows is one of the stronger ones. I actually think Shadows, Brobnar, and Dis are the three to watch, and that makes me sad as somebody who likes Mars Logos Untamed. But I think that every single house is done up exceptionally well in that they all have a very good feel to them, and they're balanced around that feel. Like Brobnar, real good at creatures, real good at fighting. They're okay about, destroying extra amber with like burn the stockpiles. They're okay at gaining amber situationally with like blood money and war chest. What's the one that lets you? What's the action that lets you every time you fight you gain amber? I'm forgetting.
It's not loot the bodies, but
No, loot the body is when you destroy the creature. But yeah, the same thing. Like they have real good ways of getting of amber control, both gaining and losing amber. You go down to Dis. Dis is all about the destruction. Like they love going through your hand, destroying the three most powerful cards on the field. Annihilation Ritual is probably pound for pound the strongest card in the game. Again, situational. It's a rare, but when a creature would enter a discard pile, it's removed or it's purged from instead. So strong. It's got a bit of more of a little bit of amber control, less gaining amber. I think the pit demon can steal an amber, but it's more about just either destroying the amber or taking the amber, and less about gaining amber on its own. You have Logos, which is all about card draw, and no one plays with the archive better than Logos. And then you got some really cool random effects that are in there, like Wild Wormhole, Neutron Shark. Like every single faction is designed in a way that the factions have a very obvious flaw. And in the case of Mars, it's kind of a big flaw because Mars cards all combo with each other. But they also combo with each other, which is a huge strength when you're able to get those things. And I think that, and like I said before, comboing between factions, I think that is what makes it so that the game is balanced. I'm going to say there's definitely a few problem cards, like library access and being able to recur library access a couple times. That's a problem. It's not ridiculous, but like it exists. There's a few other like weird like edge case scenarios where you have 2 or 3 cards, like what's the discard that Restingus, I believe it's called.
I've been calling it Restringuntus, so
something like that. Yeah, like you can lock somebody out.
I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah, it's like a Restringus and a Dominator Bauble with a Witch of the Wilds out, and like all these things have to be come down and actually work. But then you have Control the Weak, and your turn is call the whatever house that Restingus has locked out. Then use your Dominator Bauble on the Witch to bring back Control the Weak for next turn, and yay, you win. Like that's a problem. But again, there's like 4 or 5. There's at least 2 turns where you need to set that up, and there's ways of dealing with it. But other than that, like I definitely think that all of the houses are. If you played a game with the house, just one house against one house, 12 cards, out in the average, because I'm not gonna say deck building, so you're gonna have a random assortment of those cards. On the average, I think they'll be around the 60-40 win rate, which is as best as you're gonna get. I don't think the game's gonna have a true 50-50 in this weird, awkward scenario that I've created. But I think that playing a 12 card deck of only one house versus a 12 card deck of only one house, I want to say that they are going to be even most of the time. And
so how do you respond to like the majority community consensus being that Mars is the least desirable house.
I'm a Mars player. I will happily take those houses, and I will I can see why it's the least desirable, because when it doesn't work, it's real bad. Like, Mars has some blatant weaknesses. Most of their creatures are weak. I can think of 3 or 4. I think I want to say 4 that are above 3 power.
And those ones come out stunned.
Yes, yep.
Right.
And, well, no, the Chuffate. No, yeah, the Chuffate comes out stunned. The Aetherspire deals no damage. Gromid doesn't come in stunned. You just can't play other creatures. Like, as long as he's in play, you can't play other creatures.
I mean, it doesn't seem like you're doing your case any favors
nope,
right
I'm
now.
not with Mars. No, but the trick is that, like, again, but Mars's strength is that they combo with each other. Every single card in Mars is really there to help Mars. And then you have a couple cards that make other creatures Mars, like Brainstem Antenna. You got Red Planet Raygun that you just put on any creature you want, and you're like, all right, you now have to deal with my Mars creatures, even if I don't call Mars every turn, because I have this creature that I can just reap and deal a damage for every Mars creature I have in play. Like, there are cards in there that really cause a lot of problems. I'm trying to think of the more common ones, because I don't want to always be using rares and uncommons, but like Phosphorus Stars I will throw away every single time. That's the only bad card I can think of off the top of my head that's in Mars, because it's play stun each non-Mars creature. That's usually 2/3 of your deck and maybe 2/3 of their deck. That's not a fun time.
I'm also going to put Ammonia Clouds out there as a Mars card that I find very situational. And I'm with you, man. We should form like the Mars fan club for Keyforge. I'll be the treasurer. You can be the president.
I don't want you touching my money. No way. No.
You're a wise man. But, Ammonia Clouds basically does 3 damage to every card on the field, which is not enough to take out your opponent's big cards, but it is enough to take out all of your good low power Mars cards. So it's almost getting tossed practically every time that it comes into the hand, unless I'm in a very specific kind of situation.
Yeah, there's like I can understand why, if you look at a Mars card and go, why would I ever play this? You're probably right. In a vacuum, why would I ever play this? But the fact, like, EMP Blast, each Mars creature and each robot is stunned. Each artifact is destroyed. You're hitting your own creatures a lot of the time with Mars. It's a very combo heavy. It's very reckless. But man, when you can get those Mars combos to work, like, you are in such a good position that you just like fold your hand up, put it face down and next to your deck, and go, I will call Mars until you deal with this problem.
Nick, what do you feel like if there is a strongest house, the strongest house is, or do you think that all the houses are equal, like Steven?
So I definitely don't think all the houses are equal. And I haven't been able to figure out what the strongest house is. And I guess someone will try to correct this whole conversation and say, well, what constitutes being the strongest? Physically strongest, because you probably have Brobnar, this and that. But just kind of in general, all things considered, the best house to help you win the game. From my experience and just with my decks, I would say Sanctum. Like every time I notice I have like an overwhelming board state and I'm doing very well, I look down at the board and I analyze it, and it's due to my Sanctum. And that's been the case across, like, I don't know how many decks, but more decks than not. It's not just like every once in a while that pops up. It's like almost every time when I'm noticing during a game, like, wow, this is going very well. Why is that? It's because I've got Sanctum out there. I can see the value in others. My personal 2 favorite houses, for the reason, kind of that we're talking about, that I think they're the most beneficial to have, would be Sanctum and Shadows. And whatever else gets thrown into that deck is okay with me. Either Logos or Dis I would pick. There's Dis, which it's valuable, but I don't think it's the game winning house. I think that's either Shadows or Sanctum, personally. I could be wrong, and my opinion might change as I learn to pilot my other decks better. I'm sure it'll change, but from what I've seen, it's just my personal experience has been slapping me in the face with it, is that Sanctum is what has like saved my butt over and over and over again. And I think it's because Sanctum has a little bit of everything you might need. A lot of cards are really specific to, Brobnar is really just about kind of beating down, and Shadows is really about, Amber manipulation and stuff. And it seems like Sanctum brings a little bit of everything to the table, and maybe that's why. It's because I'm able to just reliably pick Sanctum the majority of my turns, and I'm not having to like, oh boy, I really need to swap to Dis so I can, do this or that, or I really need to use Shadows so I can, disrupt what he's doing. It's, for the most part, I can find something within my Sanctum, cards that will solve most problems I have in a game so far. And maybe I'm just lucky with my decks. That's also possible.
This is one of those things where I cannot wait until theoretically we get a point where we can really start crunching the numbers on wins and losses. Hopefully that's information that we'll be able to pull out of the Keyforge app via the API or something else like that, in order to really start looking at what the most winningest decks have in common, what houses are represented more than any others, what commons, rares, uncommons, uniques are most represented. Because right now, I think so much of our conversations around this, and they're good conversations and I like having them, are really governed by personal experience. And so oftentimes, like, my perception of Sanctum and your perception of Sanctum simply don't match up because our experiences are so totally different. And that's based on the kind of decks that we've pulled and the kind of decks that we've played against. And to be totally truthful, that's one of the things that I genuinely, once again, love about Keyforge. It's not all set in stone. The meta is not universal. We're still figuring all this stuff out. And so, and once we get all this stuff figured out, there is nothing in the world to stop them from adding a new set, changing the algorithm, doing something else to return us to this state. So on the one hand, we're all constantly in a state of discovery and really figuring out, what the game is and how the game is played and what's feasible and what's not feasible and what's fun, while at the same time also knowing that, there's the impending specter of, everything we've learned possibly being changed in future. And that's kind of a fun state for the game to be in. The Age of Discovery is well named because I feel like the Age of Discovery is going to last for a good long while.
I definitely 100% agree with you on that, but I also feel like that once the decks are going to be more found out and we start looking at more of the data, I think you're going to see more of a shift in not the algorithm itself, but the players themselves. And you're going to see them, because players want to win. That's just who we are. We want to be competitive. We want to win. And you're going to see when that data comes out, you're going to have a big shift in, well, this 3 combo is, these 3 houses are winning, 60% of the games. Is that because of piloting? Is that because of cards? Is that because, like, all these little factors that can play in, and everyone's local meta is 100% different. And definitely, I think that's why speaking with these personal experiences is good, because I am sure every single listener to the podcast is in a different meta and a different state than the 3 of us. And I think each one of the 3 of us is in a very different state of each other. My meta is very, very hard pushed on, does this have bait and switch? It wins. To the point where the tournament that I went to on Saturday, the person who won the tournament played against a Shadows deck every single round. Mine had 1 bait and switch and no other like cool stuff. It had a couple urchin like pullbacks and stuff like that, but everyone there apparently brought a Shadows deck. And I don't know if it was because of the meta, because we wanted to try something. I brought a Shadows deck because I don't play Shadows very often and I wanted to try something different. And it was survival format, so I had a second deck in the background, which is my deck that is my bread and butter. But I think that once the data comes out, I really don't hope that everyone starts fawning over the decks that are like the houses that are going crazy. And that's because we can't build the deck. And that, I think, is the best decision that Keyforge has made, in that even if your house is doing super exceptionally well. And I'll throw out this random perfect world scenario. Shadows wins 80% of the time. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Shadows is great. It's the best deck around. Your deck might still be in that 20th percentile where you're never going to win a game just because of the cards you pull. And that's good and bad. Like, it sucks if you pull that bad of a deck, but at the same time, it means your other cards might be better. It means you might need to pilot the deck better to get into that 80% win ratio where Shadows is winning all the time. Like, and I agree. I think that the Age of Discovery is aptly named because everyone is still trying to figure all of these little nuances out between the game.
I see what you're saying. I think there's going to be two periods of time, two phases in how this is all going to work out. Right now, we're in kind of the first phase of figuring things out. As we gain, we're like a new society. Like as we gain knowledge, we get more powerful, and we're all moving toward the single goal of figuring out like what is the best combination of cards, what's the best house, what's the best house combination, whatever, all that stuff. And with that data coming out, I think we're going to play a couple months. That data is going to become available however it is, whether it's crowdsourced, fan sourced, whatever, or it comes officially from the site. We're going to figure all that out. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be like, I'd call like an objective meta discovered. And it's just going to be, something that like isn't really common in other card games, because all the card choices are so unique. You can have like this is what, the consensus is that people are kind of playing right now, but like this will be backed by like hard data. But once that like objective meta is discovered, there's no way around it. Everyone's going to flock to it. Everyone's going to go for those house combinations. Everyone's going to go for those card combos, whatever it is. But that's also going to introduce like an objective-ish like counter meta. And with that, we're going to be in this phase 2 of like that meta has been established, but now there's a whole army of people that have reevaluated their play style, not to play into the meta, but to combat the meta. And that's going to disrupt that objective meta that we've discovered. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens at the end of that like second phase. And I'm not sure if that's exactly how it'll play out, but I have a pretty good hunch that it is. And I think that'll be cool to see. So I don't think the game will be ruined by any means, and it's going to be kind of like a refresh, like almost like they wipe the board clean, because for what we figured out is good in phase 1, is going to be totally disrupted when everybody comes to the table with their shadows, whatever. But then there's going to be the introduction of that counter meta that's going to disrupt all of that and potentially knock that down once everyone's playing the cards that combat that meta that's been discovered, if that makes sense.
It definitely does make sense. Your point about people chasing what will be seen as the most winningest kinds of decks or the most winningest combos is well made, because I think we're already starting to see to a degree people chasing after decks that are perceived as having a real high win ratio. I mean, we've had the conversation about Horsemen a couple of times, I think, on this podcast, and ultimately, those of us who are sitting here understand that Horseman is not a guarantee of anything. Horseman is cool. Horseman works really well in the right scenario. Horseman is fun to have because it's an interesting piece of early Keyforge culture. Having a Horseman deck is like fun and it feels good to have in your collection. But the fact that people are going out there willing to pay, top dollar for double Horseman and, much higher than average for regular Horseman decks, I think already indicates the fact that people are perhaps chasing a thing that has a perception of being a winning deck, while at the same time, we don't actually necessarily have any real data to back that up other than people's personal observation at this point. I could be wrong. People could be buying them just because they want a Horseman deck because it's cool to have a Horseman deck, as I mentioned. But, I think that within the next couple of months, we're going to see some other combination really start to heat up in the secondary market sales because it's perceived as being a key to victory, if you will. Have either of you guys seen any, anything heating up on the Library Access Nepenthe Seed combo? The draw your entire hand in one turn if you can get it off combo?
I've seen it mentioned, sure.
I'm wondering if that's going to be the one that starts to go up in price. Like if people really start to chase after it and it starts commanding top dollar on the secondary market.
I'm pretty sure it already is. Like it's such a strong combo that like Again, it takes a couple turns to fire, and it can be disrupted by the opponent. But
Side question.
so yeah, go for it.
What would a Keyforge deck have to have for you to pay a good amount of money for it? Let's set this at $50. What would a deck have to have in it for you to want to spend $50 in it? And is there a deck out there, theoretically, or the one that you're even aware of, that you would pay $50 for?
I have a really boring answer to that. I wouldn't. I wouldn't buy a deck, not because I'm some elitist that insists on just cracking my own decks open and doesn't believe in the secondary market, but because I hope my words don't carry any weight, and I'm sure they don't, but I would hate to be responsible for just like disrupting the third party market or whatever. But like, I don't think anyone knows enough to justify spending actual like significant money on a deck unless you're doing it just for fun. Or like you said, like there was a combo in the deck that you really wanted to play, like that's fine. But like to go out, the people that are spending $200, $300 on a deck, like it's unjustified, I guess. Like I don't think you could convince me, especially not, like, I don't know. It might be a cop out just because I don't know enough about Keyforge. Like I'm not good at like, like discovering meta, like looking at a card list, being able to recognize combos or meta or anything like that. But I personally don't think there's any set of cards that combined would justify like a significant price tag yet. That may change as I I don't know. It may change as I learn more cards, but if it does change, I'm going to have such a strict list of cards that a deck needs to contain that I probably won't be able to find it. I would want to dictate, 6 of each of those 12 cards in each house. I'd have to that deck would have to be 18 cards perfect, which might be possible. It might be easier than I think. I don't know. That's just my opinion. Is that I don't think there's any combination of cards that would pop up actually like in the wild that would be worth me hunting down and trying to pay a significant amount of money for. My best deck that I have, I wouldn't be able to spot that in the wild. Like looking at that card list, I've done it. Looking at that card list, there's nothing about it that stands out that makes me say, yes, this will be perfect. But lo and behold, like it's my consistent winner. Like since I've started marking my spreadsheet, it hasn't lost once. So I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to spot that in the wild. But that's just me. Maybe you guys have a less boring answer.
I don't really have like a solid answer for that, but definitely I would go for things that have really neat combos or that play with the game in a very different way than normal. I think that might be why I'm so attracted to like the Logos Mars combination, because they play the game very differently. Logos has access to the archives and does some crazy archive shenanigans. Mars has some archive shenanigans, but they really build around like the combos. And I always forget if it's like Timmy or Johnny from Magic, the one that like in the perfect world, like this is an art form and I can bit this combo off if everything fires exactly right. I'm one of those kind of players. Like I like being creative and I like doing things outside of the ideal. So I mean, the deck that I bought that has the Zookeeper and the Knowledge's Power, I paid $12 for. I found it on a site. I stumbled upon it randomly and was just like, I saw the combo and I'm like, yeah, I want this. This seems like fun to me. So I mean, I paid a $2 premium for a deck that is probably honestly subpar. It wins about 40% of the time that I feel like. I mean, again, I'm not tracking my wins and losses, so that number might be skewed. But it's a fun combo, and I enjoy playing it. But like things that are really able to like abuse the archives that not a lot of the other factions have. Some crazy shenanigans that I'm able to do with Mars with some Comet Pheromones and Megamouth and Agent Smith. Like that, those decks seem fun to me. Those like, I guess you'd call it poetry in motion kind of decks. If I saw one like that, I'd spend $50 on it. Begrudgingly, I would not. I'd look after the fact when I got my credit card bill and be like, "Oh, what did I do?" oh, this was a mistake. But then I'll get the deck and I'll play it and I'll have fun. I'll be like, all right, I'm investing $50, which is the same cost as a video game, into something that I enjoy. Like, all right, if you find a deck with like Bear Flute and like 11 Ancient Bears, like I'd buy that. It would not be $50 because that deck would be insane. But like something like just silly combos like that are just so either ridiculous or just fun to play, or that change how the game works from like if I can change the game, say like every Keyforge game is checkers or chess, and I bring a deck that I can play a couple cards and go, we're playing cribbage now, and you're like, what's cribbage? And I'm like, it's a card game, and you're like, this is chess, and I'm like, I know. Like those are the kinds of decks that I would be willing to spend some crazy money on.
I would be willing to spend money on a particular deck that I know exists because initially when I heard that people were really like hunting for decks that had their name in them, I was like, oh, whatever, that doesn't matter to me at all. Like, it's cool if you can get one. It must be nice to have one in your collection, but it's not going to break my heart if it never comes to pass for me. And then I found out there is one that has both my first name and my last name in it, and now I am obsessed with owning it, and it is terrible. It is a Logos Sanctum Shadows deck that has 3 Nexuses and no other shadow creatures in it. Yeah, it's not even good, but just the pure appeal of having a Keyforge deck with both my first name and my last name in the deck name, I want it so badly. So if you are the owner of Alexa Devil, Burden, Kennedy Convict, holler at your boy. I'll make you an offer for it. But those are the things that I think would almost be worth spending money on, is getting a name that has some personal resonance with you. I'm not normally a big fan of like name talk around the game. It's fun when you see a funny name, but that amusement lasts for about 3 seconds and then it's kind of over. But that's the one where I'm like, man, I want that just so that I could say that I have a Keyforge deck that has my first and last name in it.
I'm pretty sure that counts as playing with yourself, and I don't want to see that at any Keyforge table. You keep that deck at home. Like, oh, that ain't me.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've looked it up and I haven't seen anything that shares my last name. Definitely.
See, now I have to look. So I'm looking right now.
Yeah, some with my first, but none with my last. But like you said, just kind of an interesting novelty. Not something I'd be super heartbroken about, but something pretty cool. It looks like that's all the time we've got today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. A couple parting notes. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, don't forget to check out the forum on thekeyforge.com/forums, or you can just go to the website, thekeyforge.com, click the forums link. It just opened up. It's brand spanking new. It's very quiet, very empty. Be the change you want to see in the forum. Make a post, scream into the void, and I promise you somebody will scream
I'm making
back.
an account right now. I didn't know the forum was up.
There you go. That's right. If you enjoyed the show and what we do at thekeyforge.com, you can check out our new Patreon at patreon.com/thekeyforge. Again, thank you to the few people who have already pledged, whether it be $1, $2, $5, $1,000, whatever you want to pledge, that'd be awesome. It really gives us something to kind of quantify, and just it gives us something tangible to say that this is how much people enjoy what we're doing. We should really keep at it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure to check us out wherever you find podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. And we will see you next week.